Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. My guest this episode is sober dad and photographer Joe Conzo Jr., who captured the birth of hip-hop through his images. And much of the work is captured in his book, Born in the Bronx. Joe, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And, it's the day before Father's Day. So
how cool is that?
It is cool. It's a good day. How many kids do you have?
I have a daughter and a son. I have a 37-year-old son who thinks he knows everything and acts like he's 15 years old sometimes. I have a 27-year-old daughter who thinks she's 35 and knows everything. So, yeah.
So basically, it never changes no matter how old they get.
It doesn't. Okay. And my mother, may she rest in peace, she raised 5 kids by herself. She always said, wait till you have your own kids. Wait till you have your own kids.
And then did you always want to have kids? Did you know that was a thing for you?
Yes, because like I mentioned, my mother had 5 kids. She was an only child till she was about 14, 15 years old. That's why she had 5 kids, because she didn't want none of us to grow up without any siblings. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids. So I had to grow up fast. I was the babysitter, the cook when she was off working 2 jobs, going back to get her master's and stuff. So, yeah, you want to have kids to carry on your legacy, so to speak, your name, so to speak. So, yeah, it was always in the cards.
Yeah, and tomorrow's Father's Day, but shout out to all the moms. We probably don't shout out the moms enough on this podcast, but they're badass. Yes. My wife's a badass.
My wife's a badass too. We've been married 25 years, and she has just done amazing things and supported me through my ups and downs. But yeah, big shout out to all the moms also.
Yeah. To the point you're comfortable, let's kind of touch on your sober journey. Like, how did things start for you? And how's your day to day and all that good stuff?
Well, I mean, to give you a quick synopsis of my world, drugs and alcohol for me were just a recreational thing growing up. I could be honest, totally honest and transparent. It progressed with smoking marijuana and then into cocaine and then to mescaline, acid, as we called it back then, microdot. And, it was just a social thing. I was a functioning addict, so to speak. I went to work, paid my rent, this, that, and the other. And what changed for me was when I experienced death for the first time in my life. And that was the death of the matriarch of our family, my grandmother, the late Dr. Evelina Antonetti. I had never experienced death before in my life. So I turned to substance drugs to mask that pain. It didn't become a social thing anymore. It became a habitual thing where if I had an argument with my girlfriend, I had a rough day at work, this, that, and the other, I turned to drugs to mask that pain. And the next thing you know it, I was homeless, living in the streets, in and out of rehabs, in and out of methadone programs. I mean, my mother, God bless her soul, she even sent me to the south of France. I was living in Toulouse, France for 6 months in this drug commune that they had going on in the late 80s, early 90s. And people from all over the world would come there to get off of drugs. And the way they weaned you off of drugs there was with a tea called tisana. You drink it like 3 or 4 times a day. It would just detox your system. And then you would work the land, live off the land, and just give back, give back. And I'll never forget, after 6 months living abroad, I got an S on my chest. I thought I was Superman. And I said, I'm leaving. And they're like, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere. So I left. I knocked on the embassy door in Spain. And I said, I'm an American and I need to get home. They flew me back and uh, I fell a few more times. But it wasn't until I got some serious treatment in, I don't mind saying the name, Samaritan Village. I spent 18 months in Samaritan Village up here in upstate New York. And I had some serious counseling. And an addict always thinks that they're by themselves, that they're the only ones going through these issues. And when I sat in these group sessions and looked to the left and looked to the right of me and heard the same stories from different people, I connected and I was able to deal with the baggage that I was carrying. My father was a heroin addict. Growing up as a kid, I remember him taking me to shooting galleries. Um, and I was terrified, and that used to give me nightmares. But, that vicious cycle, I did the same thing with my son. So, again, getting back to Samaritan Village, after spending 18 months there, I've been clean now for 33 years.
Nice. And that breaks the cycle.
Yes, yes, hopefully,
Hopefully.
hopefully.
Well, yeah, and that's, the notion of as a parent, there's a lot you just can't control. You do
No,
your best to kind of put your values there. We always talk about, you put up guardrails, like, and they're different at different ages. I've got, a 9-year-old and I've got an almost 22-year-old. And so, like, their guardrails are different. The
correct,
idea is to help them learn to not fly off the road. They're going to
correct,
go too fast on the road. They're going to swerve around the road. You're just trying to keep them from like Thelma and Louising off the cliff.
correct.
But you
And
got to give them the room to swerve.
so hard. You don't want your kids to make the same mistakes you did just in life in general. And when it comes to substance abuse, that's the last thing you want to hear, see that your kids are going through the same thing that you went through. You know, I, I don't wish my trials and tribulations, even though they made me into the man that I am today. But when it comes to drugs and alcohol, I don't wish it on any other human being. We weren't born addicts. You know what I mean? We were all born pure, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You know, harmless to do good, and we're just corrupted, for lack of better words, in this world that we live in, and you just don't want that for your kids. So either A, you become overprotective, you're too transparent with what you've gone through, and sometimes you got to sit back and let go and let God.
Yeah. It's a fine line of like what you say and don't say. And obviously it differs, right? If your kid's 5 or
Oh
they're
yeah,
15, it's different things. I mean, I remember with the oldest at one point, I was like, oh, you need to have some knowledge of like what's out there, right? Like what's meth, what's fentanyl. Like you need to know what these things are and what they can do. So when you go do the natural teenager thing, which is to rebel and experiment and do these things, you at least have some, and about sex too, all those things, you have to have some base knowledge of like the stuff. So at least you're informed.
I agree with you 110%. And today's world is. I'm 62 years old. Okay, there was no internet back then. There was no social media or anything like that. So whatever I learned from the streets, walking around in my neighborhood, this, that, and the other. Today, it's just I look at my 10-year-old granddaughter, and uh, you know, I, I don't do it as much, but my wife, her grandmother, is always checking to see what she's on and TikTok and this, that, and the other,
Yeah, we do that.
because you have to. It is so prevalent. All of these, I just saw something the other day about, Freon and laughing gas, and how they use laughing gas to make whipped cream, and how you can walk into shops and buy these little canisters of laughing gas. I mean, that's a controlled substance,
Right.
and kids are on TikTok inhaling this shit. You know what I mean? It's just so fucking mind boggling.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I do though is like my kids have my passcode.
Okay.
Like you can go on my phone. I'm 54. I got nothing to hide. And like nothing very interesting there, But you know what? I'm looking at your phone. Here's mine. Like have at it. I got solitaire on there. like, you know, but I'm not going to, obviously, like an adult, some things are private, but I'm also not going to put a lot of standards in place that I'm not willing to do. But we're always looking because what's hard, when we were teenagers or whatever, you had to it was harder to get information. I mean, like porn stuff now is just everything's a click away.
A click, one
And
little mistype in a letter in a search, boom.
so I have a funny story about that. So my oldest, almost 22, we were on the computer. I don't remember how old he was, maybe 7 or 8, and he's a soccer kid, always been a soccer kid, and he wanted to go to Dick's Sporting Goods. So guess what I typed in? Dicks.com. And I 100% that was not Dick's Sporting Goods.
I bet you it wasn't.
It was not. I got off that browser very fast. I don't know if it is now because I also thought, wow, Dick's Sporting Goods would probably pay almost any amount of money to
To get
control
that,
that URL.
yeah,
Like, I mean, so I also thought, man, they're making money on this URL because I am sure Dick's Sporting Goods would pay millions of dollars for that. But
it
anyway, so
just
yeah, to your point, I got off that page fast, but I laugh about it. My dad thought that was hilarious too, and I told that story. But it is, you just can stumble on stuff or the videos, and it's hard to keep up with like the newest thing. And a
I
lot of things
listen,
vanish. Or
it's
your kids
just
have fake accounts.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I'll
the
follow you, Dad. And
yeah,
then I got 75 other fake accounts that I
yeah.
use.
It's just amazing. I'm pretty computer literate, but my 10-year-old granddaughter will run circles around me.
They were born with these things
Because
essentially.
exactly, and that's the point. She will run circles around me. When I'm having an issue with my iPhone, Papa, give me a phone. I'm like, oh my god, how'd you do that?
We remember televisions with knobs, sir.
And
Right?
and the
You had to
aluminum
get up.
foil
Yeah.
antennas.
Yeah. Yeah. We remember a world before cable. And then, because my kids are 9, 13, those are my stepkids, but they're my kids.
Oh, they're your
And then
kids, yeah.
18 and almost 22, I have this like range. And the difference of
Wow,
worldview between 9 and 22 is pretty huge. And the 22-year-old, he's like, kind of like, what? Like, why are they on? Like, they can't, why do they have phones in school? And like, everything's just changed. It's just, you're acting a little bit like an old man, but like, it's just you're a different generation.
that's right.
And you remember kind of a time before certainly a cell phone was what it is now. You remember a cell phone that was just a phone and that's all we used it for. And now, what do they say? The cell phone's got more computing power than like one of the
Then your
Apollo
computer,
spacecraft,
yeah.
right? Like, so yeah.
It's just, I've been asked by my granddaughter, Papa, there was no cell phones. You didn't have any cell phones. You didn't have any, TikTok or Instagram or YouTube video. I go, nope. We had channels 1 through 13, and that was it. you
If you
know,
got all of them.
if you got all of them, and at a certain time at night, I think 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, that was it.
Yeah.
Nothing else was broadcast. All you saw was the American flag waving. You know
And
what I
I
mean?
I remember my mom would say, because I grew up in Maine, and
Okay.
we had, like, a little bit of land, and my mom was always like, "Don't tell me you're bored. We have 5 acres of land, and you have a bike. Like, don't tell me you're bored." You know? And now I feel like a little bit and I will fully own I fall into this. I'm waiting in the grocery store line, what do? I'm on my phone, right? Like, we're all on it too. I'm like, "Oh, did we forget how to just be quiet in our minds?"
Or strike up a conversation with a stranger.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It is so crazy how if you say something to a stranger while waiting online, this, that, and the other, they'll hesitate to answer you because they don't know what to expect next. And that's the
yeah,
world we live in today because we're all with our heads down in this little machine that we have in our hand. And again, like you said, when cell phones first came out, it was just to make a phone call and receive a phone call.
yep,
And then you only used it between the hours of such and such because it didn't cost you that much money to use it. So you were
yeah,
like, call me back after 9 o'clock while it's free.
yeah,
you know?
yeah, when you had, like, minutes of internet time.
That's right.
But anyway, before we go down that rabbit hole too much, I do wanna, like, touch on photography. So when did you pick up a camera?
So as I say when I get asked this question is I was a chubby little kid with an Angela Davis afro. Okay. I didn't have the gift of gab. I wasn't that athletic or anything like that. My stepfather at the time, Michael Caine, was an amateur family photographer who took pictures all the time. And I gravitated towards that. And he gave me my first point and shoot camera. Um, in junior high school, I was a yearbook photographer, high school photographer. My mother supported this love and passion that I had of photography, allowed me to build a dark room in our apartment because we lived in a duplex apartment, so we had 2 bathrooms. But yeah, I have a report card from I went to private school during my earlier years at Columbia University. There's a private school called Agnes Russell. So I have a report card from 1973. So that made me 10, 11 years old saying that Joey is excelling in photography. So, and I just fell in love with photography. It became my passion. I was the only kid in the neighborhood taking pictures. And then, my mother allowed me to build a darkroom. I was developing my own pictures and making 8x10s and giving them out to my friends in the neighborhood. And next thing you know, I'm hanging out with a group of guys that are doing this thing called rap, called hip hop. And I became their photographer, and the rest is history. I traveled the tri-state taking pictures with them. If I wasn't taking pictures of this thing that we called hip hop back then, my dad, Joe Conzo Sr., was is the foremost historian on Latin music today. And he had a 50-year relationship with Tito Puente, the king of Latin music.
Yeah,
So when I wasn't hanging out with my friends, I was hanging out with my dad because my dad just came back into my life after being absent because of his substance abuse history. But I'm taking pictures of Tito Puente, Celia Cruz, Hector Lavoe, Eddie, and Charlie Palmieri, all these Latin greats, you know? And my archive is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And my grandmother, who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Evelina Antonetti, who was known as affectionately as the Hell Lady of the Bronx, who was fighting against, movies like Fort Apache the Bronx and Paul Newman for depicting blacks and Puerto Ricans as prostitutes, drug addicts, murderers, and this, that, and the other. She was fighting the Board of Ed. She's fighting City Hall. And I'm taking pictures of all these demonstrations. My playground growing up was demonstrations in Washington, D.C. and City Hall and the Board of Ed. So my body of work is just so diverse, but I'm known as the man who took hip hop's baby pictures.
Yeah.
And then 1984, 85, like I mentioned earlier, drugs that, were just a weekend thing, a hanging out thing, became a daily routine of mine. And I became homeless and sold all my camera equipment and pretty much lost everything. And for whatever the reason was, my mother saved all my negatives, all my black and white. I mean, 10,000 negatives. And she would
Note to
tell,
the children out there what a negative is, right? Like
yeah,
my dad's a photographer, so we had a dark room, right? Like it didn't just wasn't an SD card you put in your
no,
computer.
it
There's
wasn't.
actually like physical stuff and
Yeah,
chemicals to develop. So
that's
yeah,
right.
I grew up around dark rooms, so I get it. But right, it's physical things
Physical things.
that you
And,
had to save.
and I asked my mother years later, and she goes, this was the only thing that I had of you that I could save.
Yeah,
And
it's
the rest,
deep.
it is deep. It is deep. And, listen, my mother was my biggest enabler, my biggest enabler, because she just could not phantom me being an addict. And it wasn't, and, she ran a drug rehab for women with children. As a matter of fact, La Casita is the name. She opened up the first drug facility for women with children. If you were a mother, a single parent back then, we're talking the 80s, and you needed to enroll yourself in a rehab, your kids would get put into foster care.
I mean, it is not different today. I mean, one of the big, we shouted out the moms. One of the biggest reasons, women with children do not seek treatment and rehab is because they are concerned that their kids will get taken away. I've been connected with a group, I'm in upstate New York that's trying to start one of those very things, a treatment
Well,
for women with children. And it's 2025. So
and
shout out to your mom for being
it's
ahead of her time.
crazy. Yeah. So in my mother's program, if a woman came in with children, my mother would take them in. The kids would go to my mother's daycare center or to school while the mother was in treatment, in counseling and group therapy and this, that, and the other. And the family unit would stay together. And when that mother graduated from the program, my mother would give them an affordable apartment and give them a job. Unheard of.
Was she a superhero? She sounds like she should have
I
had like
like
a
to think
cape,
of her.
but
To the point where Mother Hale out in Harlem,
mhm.
she started the same kind of program. And my mother used to travel the country speaking on the importance of keeping that family unit together, especially for women, you
Well,
know.
and the other like intersect there is they didn't get treatment and just say, "Cool, see you later." They got a place to live, right? So it was this continuity of service
And a job.
and a job, right? So all the things, and probably also could still use the daycare,
Yes.
right? So it was actually a holistic program. You weren't treating just one thing because it's complicated.
It is
Addiction
complicated.
and recovery is complicated.
Yeah.
And if you're not a person of resources, right? Like I always say, my family would never let me fall through the cracks and had the resources to make sure that that didn't happen, But not everybody is so blessed or, privileged as I
But,
am as like
you
a
know,
white guy in America.
I hear you. But substance abuse doesn't discriminate. Doesn't discriminate. You can have the resources, don't have the resources, you can be a different shade of color, skin color. It doesn't discriminate. So getting back to my mother, she was my biggest enabler until her coat got pulled one day and said, "Listen, that's not your son. That is a drug addict.
Yeah.
That is a drug addict." And my mother kicked me out because I was living on her couch. Remember, I was homeless. She kicked me out in the middle of the winter. I hated her for that, but it was the best thing she ever did for me. The best thing she ever did for me, because I went and got some real treatment after that.
Yeah.
And up until she died in 2017 in Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, I thanked her every day. I thanked her every day.
Yeah. And it's hard. Like, that's sort of like the extreme example, but it can be hard as a parent to kind of do the tough thing. At least for me, I'm a big softy, you know?
I,
But it's like hard to put up those boundaries sometimes.
Stephen, it is extremely difficult. It is extremely hard. I'm presently going through that with my son, Joe Jr., who is battling substance abuse himself. And I've given him every opportunity, made phone calls, gotten him into rehabs, and he keeps, you know, falling down again. And I try and be there for him as much as I can. And this is a constant battle that I'm having with my wife because she is the soft one in the family, you know? And I'm like, listen, I can't become that enabler, or I can't continue to be this enabler because we're doing more damage than good. We're doing more harm than good. And yes, we can sit here for hours going back and forth, what is good, what is bad, this, that, and
Right.
the other. But like, I can only base that on my experience. Again, my mother was my biggest neighbor. She like, here's $20, here's $40. Everybody would say, no, 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 no. She goes, that's my son, that's my son. And it wasn't until she stopped becoming my enabler and did some extreme parenting with me, I didn't get clean. I didn't get clean. Mind you, that's 30 years ago. Things are different today. It's a whole different ball game. We didn't have fentanyl. We didn't have all this other stuff that's going on. It's a different world. And that's what I'm being told. My wife is the executive assistant to a 30-day rehab up here in Middletown, New York. And she's always bouncing things off of me. And I'm always asking her. And it's like, it's just it's just so different. It's almost like a profit making business today, where in my time going through programs, yeah, the first thing they ask you for, if you have insurance, this, that, and the other. But if you didn't have insurance, you can still get it and get some sort of treatment. And I don't know. It's just different today.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think the risk is higher. And I think sometimes some of that enabling, it comes out of fear, right? Like fear if I don't do something, if I don't let them sleep here, if the worst is going to happen. I mean, I think that that's in parenting, like the fear of something is, can keep things from happening. And this is sort of a funny example, but I remember when the oldest got his license and then he drove off with his younger sister in the car. And I thought, Jesus, that's everything. That my
That's your
whole
world.
world just pulled out of the driveway. But it also had to happen,
Yeah.
right? I couldn't just like lock them. Yeah, I couldn't, because kids also need some struggle to build resilience, or that's not even struggle. They just need to be like kids. And the oldest, he graduated under COVID, like his
Mm,
last years were
wow.
COVID. And I'm seeing now because his sister, she's about to graduate. And I'm like, oh, right. That's what senior year of high school is supposed to look like. That's what, not masks at a prom. And like, I was all good with masks, but it was a weird time. Like, not just hanging out with your parents, like you're supposed to be out there doing stuff with your friends, not
That's
just
right.
like locked down. And there's definitely, I see impact from that.
Oh, we're definitely, I did 30 years with the New York City Fire Department as a paramedic, so I'm a little versed in the health field and stuff. You know, I was one of those thinking that this pandemic, before it was called a pandemic, was just gonna, be gone in a couple
Yeah.
weeks and stuff, and ended up being how many years? But we're definitely seeing the impact of this pandemic affect our kids and adults.
Yeah.
You know, my granddaughter's 10 years old. She was an infant during this
Right.
whole pandemic, and you just want the best for your kids, you know, in every aspect in life. You know, my daughter who graduated her senior year pregnant and walked down the aisle with my granddaughter, went straight to college and did 3.5 years of college at Lehman College in the Bronx and had to stop because of the pandemic. And she hasn't been back to school.
Right. And she
And
was
I'm
so close.
so close. And I'm like, go back to school. And, she's struggling with her issues with drinking and this, that, and the other. And it's like, go back to school. I'll pay, the enabler comes out of me. I'll pay your rent if you go back to
Mhm.
school.
Or at least babysit.
I well, I do that as already because I'm retired, so
Yeah.
that's my Energizer Bunny. My granddaughter is like, Papa, come pick me up, and can I come hang out and this that, and the other. So she keeps me going. But it's just I don't know. You just again, and my wife and I fight all the time. My wife's from the Bronx. She's 13 years younger than me. We've been together 25 years. She's an ordained minister. And sometimes she's like, let go and let God, this, that, and the other. I'm like, no, that's my daughter. That's my
Yeah.
son. I'm going to give them that tough love. And we're always butting heads how to deal with our kids and stuff. But, at the end of the day, sometimes I got to just revert back to 12 steps and just let go and let God.
It's hard though.
And it is hard, really hard. And, I'm honest. You know, my daughter knows, she's seen my NA medallion that I wear every day. She's heard my horror stories, same as my son and stuff. And, we'll have these heart to heart talks and like, guys, both of yous, both of yous, come on, come on, come on. Let's get this thing straight. Life is beautiful, but it can be hard, but life is good.
Yeah. And I always say there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It can be hard for some people to see. I was lucky. I kind of recognized what was going on. I say one night my grandmother kind of came down, was like, "You're going in the wrong direction." And I
Wow.
just stopped drinking. I just turned
Wow.
the other way, you
Wow.
know, before it got real bad. I was like, "Yep, whatever that was, the universe, God, whatever term people want to put on it.
Right.
That was the moment." And I just went the other way.
And you looked
And
up to your grandmother because if
uh,
she had that effect on you.
100%, 100%. I have, she always talked about being greatly blessed, and I have that tattooed on my arm,
Oh, wow.
and she was, raised my mom and her two sisters, World War II. You know, my grandfather was in the Navy, World War II. He was a doctor in the Navy. So, like, she had those three girls, you know, outside of Tacoma, Washington, and was doing it while he was overseas. I did a project in college, all the letters they had written back and forth. They
Wow.
had saved all the letters. So cool. You
Wow.
know, like paper, like people don't do that anymore, you know?
No, they
These
don't.
and my grandmother has beautiful handwriting, but all the stuff about like my mom and what she was doing, it was like, you know, super cool. I mean, I guess they call that the greatest generation. And but yeah, she was totally someone I admired. You know, we'd read poetry together. She was
Yeah.
cool. She was real deep.
I miss
And
my grandmother too.
yeah,
I do.
grandmothers are and
Special.
grandparents, but now you get to be a grandparent. So that's
Yeah,
also
yeah,
it's a special.
it is.
Yeah,
It
like I
is.
look at my folks and then my younger kid, like those grandparents, like that's and my in-laws, they're close to us. So those kids see their grandparents all the time. And it's such an important it's like a different relationship, but it's
Yeah.
such a cool and important
I
relationship.
mean, listen, I can't remember the last time I said no to my granddaughter. And I have 3 grandchildren. So one is here in Middletown, New York with me, and the other 2 are in Providence, Rhode Island. And, you know, we see each other a couple times a year. The other 2, they're 14 and 5 years old. And, like, they can do no wrong. They can't do no wrong. And, like, you know, I rarely say no to my grandkids. Rarely. It's just even like my grandmother, you know, every Sunday it was at her house in the Bronx on Woody Crest Avenue. It was family time, nieces, nephews, cousins, grandkids, this, that, and the other, family dinner. The adults sat at one table, we sat at the kids' table. And like every time we laughed, she'd slip me $5, you know what I mean? And I do the same, you know,
Yeah.
it meant so much. It meant so much.
Yeah, I think when you've earned that right as you know, you raised the kids so then you get to like, you know, be the grandparent. And like I said, it's just a different level of relationship, but I think that grandparent wisdom's also like in my experience from my grandparents and then watching my kids with theirs, like it's just that level of relationship is there's something kind of incredible about it.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So you still taking photos?
Yes, I do. Not as much, but I do. I still go to events and shoot events, and I'm always with a camera. Um, Wherever I go, as much as I don't like taking pictures with my iPhone, I do from time to time because, you know, I'm supposed to be that serious professional photographer. Don't get me wrong. These iPhones take some fabulous pictures.
They do. It's kind of nutty. No
It's kind of
darkroom required.
that's it, and you can even edit and change colors and make them black and white. But there's nothing like having a camera in your hand and doing the mathematics in terms of depth of field, what you want in focus, what you don't want in focus, composing your shot. So so yeah, I still take pictures. I still travel. I'm still blessed that I travel the world doing exhibitions.
Yeah.
And when I do that, I mean, I'm born and raised in the Bronx. I wasn't supposed to make it out of the Bronx,
Yeah.
so to speak. I've been to Bulgaria. I've been to Korea. I've been to Japan. I've been to London. I've been to Germany. I've been pretty much all the continents, you know?
Yeah.
And, excuse my language, but how fucking cool is that? You know what
Well,
I mean?
you know, and I live outside of Ithaca. So the interesting thing about Ithaca is Cornell University is there. And if you go to the hip hop collection at Cornell University, the official Joe Conzo Jr. archive, is housed at Cornell University. Now that's fucking cool.
Um,
And weird that the hip hop archive is in Ithaca, New York. True
so
story.
I'll take it a step further. My 10,000 negatives sit on the same shelf as the Gettysburg Address. How fucking cool is that?
That's probably a 100% individually unique claim that no one else can make.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So, yes, I've been fortunate. My negatives have been up there for about 12, 15 years. I'm not sure when it happened. My good friend Johan Kugelberg, who I did the book with, Born in the Bronx, was instrumental in making that happen. Um, and Cornell University shows me so much love, even today, up until today, after all these years. And they have the largest collection of hip hop ephemera in the world, and other universities have followed suit up collecting hip hop, ephemera and stuff. And it's just been a blessing. I still retain ownerships of my negatives, the images, the deal that was structured that when I die, my family will retain ownerships, the intellectual properties of my images for 50 years after I'm gone.
Yeah.
So there isn't a week or a month that goes by that I don't get an email from some filmmaker, somebody writing a book uh, that wants to license my images.
I mean, the cool thing about that is so often people in your position were screwed. Like so many early like R&B musicians
Oh,
and
yeah.
artists were just fucked by companies,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And just, like Minnie Riperton is a classic example of that. And right then they've licensed her song in a Burger King commercial. Well, when I lived in Chicago, I met her brother who was
Wow.
practically homeless. He was a trombone player.
Wow.
Um, you know, and he should have been a rich man, but
Look at
there was no they were screwed.
Yeah, I've heard the same story too from her daughter, who was a famous actress on Saturday Night Live, or was on Saturday Night. Yeah, even with the early pioneers of rap music, Curtis Blow, Grandmaster Flash, Furious Five, all these pioneers, my good friends, were screwed over by so many different companies, corporate America. And, you see things differently today where artists are maintaining or doing their own distributions and doing their own streams just to control what's theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. I
What's
mean,
theirs.
sort of the crazy big example is Taylor Swift, right? Well, she now bought all her masters back, but a lot of artists who are coming up now just retain their masters or make their own
Yeah,
little companies,
yeah,
and I kind of listen to a lot of stuff that's not, super duper popular. I mean, some stuff that is, but one of
yeah.
my favorite guys, he and his brother just have the label and they distribute everything and I collect vinyl and
You collect
they
vinyl?
I do and they release the vinyl before they put it on streaming.
You see all my
Yeah, there we
records
go.
back there?
Yeah, I bet you got some cool shit in
Oh
there.
my God.
I bet you have some really cool stuff in there.
So I have my own man cave.
Yeah.
I didn't have that in the Bronx. So being up here in Middletown for the last almost 4 years, I have a man cave. So I started collecting vinyl again. And my wife's like, whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, my wife will say, "Do you need to go downstairs and listen to records for a while?"
I do the same. I do
Yeah,
the
and
same.
I put something on and but it's like I do this thing with the kids too. I'm like pick something. Just pick something or even with the older ones we would do a thing on YouTube. It's like, "All right, you get to pick a song, but then I get to pick a song."
Yeah.
So
And like,
you're going to put something on that you want and then I'll be like, "Oh, well I'm going to put on Earth, Wind and Fire."
so I'm doing the same with my granddaughter. she'll sit down here with me in my man cave, and I'll put on a Tito Puente or even a Minnie Riperton or Pointer Sisters or Miriam Makeba, and like I'm like because my granddaughter remembers my mother before she passed away, and like I would tell her that was your great grandmother's favorite song, Pata Pata, Miriam
Yeah.
Makeba, and she sit there and bop a little head, and then she'll turn me on to I can't even remember their names, the hottest little,
Yeah.
K-pop band that's going on now, something like that. I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah, that it's interesting. That reminds me, like, family stories are so important. And there was a period where I was getting, because my mom now, she'll be 85 in July, but she's really
God
late stage
bless. I'm
dementia,
sorry.
so it's rough, but, like, the stories are gone with that, but there was a period of time where I got my parents to, like, email me stories to, like, tell the kids about their lives.
Wow.
Um, because that's that family history and, like, what was my grandmother like as, like, a little girl, or, like,
Yeah.
and that's right, that thread of the music, like, this was your grandmother's favorite song. And that'll make them go pause for a second, because 'cause
Yes.
I'll hip one of the kids, like, my 13-year-old was listening to something. Oh, Adele, she's listening to Adele. So I was like, "Okay, you kinda like this soul vibe." So I sent her something else, this song, and I just texted a link to her, and I didn't say anything, and then the other day, I was like, "Oh, she's playing it in her room." I was like, "Don't say anything, because you ruin it. Don't fucking say
Yeah.
anything." But, like, those little things, that thread.
It's I guess the onus is on us as adults to my father, who lives up by me in Warwick for the past 20 years, who's 82, he teaches online at Ostos Community College, at Lincoln Center, and I'll teach about Tito Puente, Dizzy Gillespie, all those guys. And the stories that I, he comes over and he'll sit there, and we had a family get together last weekend, and just all my brothers and sisters that were up here, we were just so fascinated watching my dad tell these stories again, you know? And, he's been clean and sober longer than me. My dad grew up during the methadone era. So he came back from Korea and was on heroin and this, that, and the other. And during the Rockefeller era, methadone was introduced, and there was no dosage limitation back then where
Yeah,
there is today. And he was on over 100 milligrams of methadone at one time, and it made him sterile, so to speak. My brother and I are his only kids, and he's been married 6 times. Um, but just to hear his stories, it's so important. You know, it's so important, and you know, again, I miss my mother because she'd tell all these stories too. I just recently lost my great aunt, who was my godmother also. So that generation, my grandmother, great aunts, they're all gone. It's
yeah,
just my father now. You know what I mean? And my aunt, his sister. That prior generation is gone, you know, and it's sad. It's just but I understand that's life. You know, sooner or later, I'm gonna be that generation. You
yeah,
know, that's gonna slowly disappear in my kids and grandkids and great grandkids' lives. You know, And I become like the hoarder of my family's archives. I have a trunk here of all my mother's papers and her thesis and this, that, and the other, my grandmother's books and stuff. So, and I guess I'll pass that on to my kids when, I'm no longer around. But like, it's so important. It's so important. Just listening to you, tell your story about, how your parents wrote letters and grandparents wrote letters and stuff. It's just you don't see that today.
yeah, or it's not saved in the same way, because
No,
there's nothing. that people can really access.
Yeah.
This is all kind of
And
in the air.
what I've begun to do in the last several years is scan a lot of these
Yeah.
documents and share them with my brothers and sisters and cousins and stuff, especially photographs. I'll send my a cousin, my closest cousin. Hey, look at your grandfather. It's like, oh my God, where'd you get that? Or he'll find something, scan it, and send it to me. So at least we have a digital archive of stuff.
Yeah, my aunt recently sent me a picture of my mom from when she was a kid that I hadn't seen, and it was just
Which is pretty dope.
super cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just
it's
super
pretty
cool
dope.
to and it was sort of out of nowhere, and I was like, "Whoa, that's like as deep,"
Yeah,
because like my mom, I was just in Maine because my dad had cataract surgery, and like so I was driving him around and brought him to his surgery, but like my mom's not communicating now. So it's like you're there and
but
that
yeah,
energy of love is real, but you're
right,
like, we're not having conversations. There's no more stories.
yeah.
So it's,
And
yeah, it's
when you deal with these issues in life, I'm just so glad that I'm sober to
amen.
deal with them. You know what I mean? I'm just so glad that I have a clear head and I can deal with it and stuff. Because if I had been going through some of the stuff like I'm a cancer survivor. 6 months after I retired from the fire department, I was diagnosed with 9/11 pancreatic and liver cancer.
Oh man, sorry.
So I had the Whipple surgery done. I did chemo, this, that, and the other, and it's like, but it was hard. It was really hard. And thank God for my wife, who literally wiped my ass and was my rock. But like, I could see myself just fucking, if this was 30 years ago when I was getting high, I could just see myself just dying on some park bench because I didn't want to deal with this shit and, you know, trying to escape from it. But
Yeah,
because
I think I'm grateful for my sobriety most when the best things happen and when the worst things happen.
that is so true. That is so true. So true. So yeah, I'm grateful for my sobriety. I'm grateful that it gets in this too. My favorite quote is, "And this too shall pass."
Yeah.
That is my fucking all time favorite quote. And then my mother used to put along with that, you know, whether you believe in a higher power, in God, whatever you believe in, this, that, and the other. She used to say that she would just pray for enough time in between the craziness so she could
Yeah.
deal with them.
Like a
Okay, I
pause.
I dealt with this, I learned from it, this, that, and the other. Just give me enough time in between stuff so I can deal with the next one. And just I get up every day, I say the serenity prayer, I go to bed saying the serenity prayer, and I'm that chill grandfather, chill. I don't get angry anymore. I
Yeah.
try not to. And if I do, I apologize because
Apologizing is important,
yeah,
right? We expect our kids to do it, so we
yeah,
should do it.
yeah. I do because sometimes that Bronx will come out of me and it's just like,
Yeah. Whoops.
whoops, sorry, but I thought I was back on 149th Street and Willis Avenue. I just,
Well, it's in your DNA.
but yeah, I'm that, and listen, I don't even, my wife can be driving down Main Street up here in Middletown and want to curse out the driver who got a little too close. And I'm just like, honey, chill,
Yeah.
chill, chill. My dad will call me up. Oh, see what's going on in the world with the president. This time I'm like, Dad, chill, chill.
I have trouble with chilling with that one sometimes,
It's
but
just, you know what? At least we're old enough to know we've been through this before. And I have to
yep,
remind that with my dad. I said, we dealt with Reagan, we dealt, all
yep,
this other stuff. So as long as they're not messing with your pension and your social security disability, you're going to be fine.
yeah,
You're going to be fine. But it's just like, yeah, it's a crazy world we live in. I just hope that World War III doesn't start. I don't want that for my kids or
Yeah.
for us now. But, I'm in upstate New York right now, and if I have to sit on my porch with my shotgun, I'll sit on my porch with my shotgun. It just
So, yeah, one more question before we wrap up. So, were you
Sure.
at the World Trade Center that day?
Yes, my ambulance was one of the first ambulances to arrive that day. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Tuesday morning, primary day. I remember going to cast my vote at 7 o'clock in the morning, and being a being a paramedic or an EMT working for the fire department at the time, we're adrenaline junkies.
Yeah.
So we want the stabbings, the shootings, the people that jump off the roofs, the motor vehicle accident. So, we would listen to the police radio also while we were listening to our radio frequency. And when the first plane hit, you know, I called the dispatcher. No, I looked at my partner. He's like, a plane hit the World Trade Center? We thought it was just a small plane, this, that, and the other.
Yeah. That's what we all thought, right?
And then a few minutes later, a second plane hit, and I told my partner, "You want to go?" I called up the dispatcher. She gave us the job. She assigned us the job. And from the Bronx, we drove all the way down to the World Trade Center. And one of the most profound things I'll never forget, besides everything else, is just driving down the West Side Highway and seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of people running away. And the
Yeah.
only people going towards the World Trade Center were the cops, firemen, EMS, you know, the first responders.
Yeah.
And to make a long story short, we parked our ambulances and vehicles under both towers, not knowing what was going to happen next. And I was inside the Marriott evacuating people when the first building collapsed, and I was trapped, buried alive, and had to dig myself out. And when I got out, I made one phone call before all the cell towers went down. Where and I called my mother, and my mother said, "Get the fuck out of there. We're under attack." Now, mind you, terrorism, that word wasn't
Yeah.
even spoke of, you know? And I'm like, "Mom," I'm crying, "Mom, I gotta find my partner, Billy, this, that, and the other." She's like, "Find your partner and get the hell out of there." And what ended up happening was I found him. He was broken leg, broken shoulder, this, that, and the other. And I got him onto a boat, those boats that were coming from Jersey. Then the second tower collapsed, and I was going to jump into the Hudson River, and I didn't. And then the Bronx kicked in to me, and I saw a Parks Department gator. I hot wired that motherfucker, and I'm gonna drive this shit back to the Bronx because you can't
Right.
drive a car down there. You couldn't drive at all. What I ended up doing for 12 hours was ferrying, triaging patients and bringing them to safety in this little Parks Department gator that could fit 4 people. And that's my 9/11 story. I had what's called survivor's guilt. Um, Again, anybody else would have relapsed. I didn't because I had that foundation. I had a good 10 years under my belt at that time, 7, 8 years. Um, but I had survivor's guilt, and I had to go. I did 2 years of therapy because literally, if you ran right, you lived. If you ran left, you died. So I had
Yeah.
survivor's guilt. I dealt with that. I knew therapy was good because therapy would got me clean and sober. And years later, you know, I come down with 9/11 pancreatic liver cancer, and like I thought my world ended.
Yeah.
Um, and my oncologist, German doctor, young, great guy, he's like, "Joe, you're lucky. We caught it early." I had no signs, no symptoms. Pancreatic cancer is like number 2 on the worst
Yeah.
cancers you can get. Silent, deadly, and it was my wife that I insisted that I get see a private doctor when I retired. And I'm like, I don't need a private doctor. I'm a paramedic. I diagnose myself. You know what I mean?
Healthcare people.
Exactly. But found a private doctor. He's the one that discovered it, and this, that, and the other. And that was a rough period of time. And you know, by the grace of God, knock on wood, I'm still here. Every 6 months, I go for CAT scans and blood works and MRIs and this, that, and the other. But again, I'm just grateful for every fucking day.
Yeah.
Every fucking day.
That is a good place to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.